Okay, everybody, let's get started. So, last time we finished just before social norms. So I'm going to briefly say a bit about the Zimbardo study. How many of you have heard of the Zimbardo study? So maybe half. So I'm not going to say too much about this. I will give a little rant about what I think about it. The basics of the study are Philip Zimbardo, a very famous social psychologist, brought in a bunch of guys, randomly assigned them to either be guards or prisoners. This is that study I showed a bit of footage of when we were talking about ethics, like research ethics. And here's how he presented the results. He claimed that the study showed that social norms and social roles can make people behave badly. As many of you know, the guards treated the prisoners very badly. There's lots of footage on YouTube you can look up of them treating the prisoners badly. But there are two enormous problems with this study. Number one, the results do not replicate. There have been several replication attempts that have failed. Now, in itself, that's not necessarily a huge problem. Like, sometimes results just don't replicate. The bigger problem is Zimbardo made the mistake of availing a lot of archival footage and archival material available. And it is, in my opinion, crystal clear that Zimbardo told the guards to be jerks to the prisoners, as did his students who were helping him run the study. There's quite a bit of evidence now that that's the case. Now, that's fine. Like, just say that's what you found. You know, like, there's nothing wrong with doing a study on obedience, and we're going to see later a study done by Milgram on obedience. But he actually did a lot of political activism on this basis, saying that, hey, look, ordinary people in a situation where they're expected or where the role makes them think they're supposed to be mean, can make them be mean, even if no one directly tells them to. And I think that is not supported by the study. Now, in general, of course, social norms and social roles can influence behavior. I just don't think that particular study does. So just to define the terms, a social norm is just, you know, an expectation or a convention about how people are supposed to behave, and a social role is some kind of position that you have where there are a set of expectations of what you're supposed to do. So I am a university instructor, that's a social role. If I came in here in clown shoes and did a dance, that would definitely violate the social norm. Okay, so that's the Zimbardo study. Another famous study on a different psychological process is the Solomon-Asch study. Have any of you heard of this one? Okay, a little bit less famous. This study is on a psychological process called conformity, which means you like to behave in ways that are similar to the people around you. Right? You conform. You conform to what others want you to do. You can further break this down into two types of social influence, two different ways that people can get you to conform. Informational social influence, which is where you come to believe what other people believe. Right? You assume that they have some information that you may not have, so you believe what they believe. And normative, which comes from the word norm, which means behaving in ways that other people behave. I'm getting a weird echo. I'm going to turn this down. So here's what Asch did. He would show subjects lines like these. There we go. So there's the target line, and then there are three other lines. You're in a group, and you are asked which of these three lines, A, B, or C, is the same as the target line. So clearly it is C. Good. When you give this to people on their own, they get these right 99% of the time. Every once in a while your eye plays a trick on you, but almost always people get them right. What Ash did, though, is he included a number of, and this is an important term to know for this study and for some of the others, Confederates. Confederates, this is not Confederates like the US Civil War. This is people who are working with the experimenter, but who are pretending to be subjects. They're pretending to be real participants. And you would vary the group size, but the first few people would all say, I don't know, A. They'd all give a wrong answer, because that's what Ash has told them to do. The final subject is the real participant, and the question is, does he or she go along with the group and say it's A, even though they can see that it's C? And to give you the numbers, I think when it's around 4 or 5 people, around 37% of the time, people go along and say it's A. Right? They have a series of trials. But around 70% of people conform at least once to an incorrect answer that the rest of the group gives. So a very large effect. Around 70% of people will say something they can see with their own eyes is not true. And to show you this in action, we'll watch a clip from that study. Okay, so many of you just got out of high school, so none of you are surprised by this, but there's a really nice study on conformity. Now, two variables that, yes? Oh yeah, no, I'm quite confident this would get by the ethics boards. As I said in chapter 2, some amount of deception is acceptable in social psychology, or psychology in general, as long as you debrief people at the end about what the study was really about. Okay. So now Ash did several replications of this, so unlike Zimbardo, he did this well, but yes?
I'd like you to haircut.
Oh, thank you, sir. You have lovely hair yourself, too.
Thank you.
Okay. So, and Ash would vary different variables. So one thing that he varied was group size. So how many people say the wrong thing before. And what he found was as you increase group size, you get more conformity, right? Not surprising. But he found that there was diminishing returns after about 4 or 5 people. So if you go from 2 to 3, more people will conform. After 5, it stops making much of a difference. That's one thing he found. He also found, unsurprisingly, if you add one dissenter, so one person who says, guys, I'm pretty sure it's 2, like before the real subject, conformity drops down quite a bit. So those are 2 other findings from him. Okay, so nothing too fancy there. Any questions about social influence? Okay, the next study is one done by Stanley Milgram. Now, this one is often grouped together with the Philip Zimbardo study, where they had the prison in the basement of Stanford, but in my opinion, this one was much more well done. It's still ethically questionable, and it's still the kind of thing that you would not get away with doing. But as far as the scientific validity of the work, he did very many replications and was very careful with how he did it. So Milgram was a Jewish American, and he was interested in how people are capable of doing terrible things. So he was just not that long after the Holocaust. And in the Holocaust, many seemingly ordinary German citizens participated in, of course, unspeakable crimes. And when some of the war criminals were brought to trial, what many of them said was, Well, I was just following orders. That was the excuse that many of them gave. And so Milgram wondered, is that true? Is there something special about the culture of Germany, or can you get ordinary people to do terrible things just by giving them orders? So he recruited a sample of American Joes, just regular dudes, brought them into the lab, and again, there were Confederates, so he would pair them with people, and one of the person was a Confederate, so someone like an actor who's working with Milgram, and the other is the real subject. And the real subject is always given the role of the teacher. And there's different versions, as I'll say later, but in the standard version that's usually talked about, the learner, who again is a Confederate, is put in another room. The teacher is quickly shown the room and is given a zap of 45 volts, just to see what it feels like. So 45 is moderately unpleasant. And then the learner is hooked up to a device that apparently electrocutes them. Now, in fact, no one's electrocuted except the teacher, just briefly, but that's just to make them believe it. The teacher is then put in another room, and they are to teach the learner a series of word pairs, and then test them on it. And they are sat in front of this, and the teacher's job is to electrocute them when they get something wrong. And each time they get it wrong, to increase the voltage. So it goes from 15 all the way to 450, and as you can see around 450 it says, danger XXX. In the room is Milgram, wearing a white lab coat. So it looks very official. And his job was to tell the teacher, you have to keep going, you must continue, increase the voltage. And the question was, how far would people go? And the way it worked was around 150, the person in the other room would start screaming, and as I'll show you in the video, the screams were very believable. Then they would complain of heart difficulties, and around 330, they go silent. They electrocute, and there's no response. And the question, so if you keep going after 330, it's reasonable to assume you may have killed this person. If you give someone 450 volts after they're unconscious, good chance you've killed them. And the question was, how many people would go that far? And the answer is around 65%. Around 65% of random, average American Joes would kill someone, or at least make them unconscious, just because some dude in a white lab coat is giving them orders. So as you can see here, it goes down until around, 345, my mistake, and then they keep going. Now, just one quick thing I'll add. There's an error in the PowerPoint notes. I indicate that 100% of people go to around 300. That's not true, as you can see here. But it is true that around 65% went all the way. So if you have the PowerPoint notes, just that's one small correction to make. Yes? Oh, he did this study like 15 times. I don't know how many people were in each sample, but quite a large sample if you add them up. So he was very careful to replicate this work in a systematic way. Okay, now before I give some caveats to this, or some additional variables that are at work, I'm going to show some footage from this study so you can see just how believable the situation was, and see people keep going. Okay, so pretty spooky result. So as I said, Milgram did this study several times and varied different things. So one thing that he varied was how close is the learner to the teacher. So in the standard version that you saw here, the learner is in another room. In other versions, they're in the same room. In one version, the teacher actually has to hold their hand down onto a shock pad. So as they get closer, obedience does go down. So the more distant the harm is from you, the easier it is to obey. Another thing that was varied was how close and how legitimate is the authority. So in some versions, in this one, the professor, like Milgram with the white lab coat, is right there in the room. In some versions, he's farther away. And again, the further away the authority is, the less obedience. They also did a version where in one condition, the person giving orders is just some guy, just someone in the study, like not a scientist in a white lab coat. And again, obedience tends to go down. I think the book says it goes down to around 20%, so pretty big effect of the perceived legitimacy of the authority. They also looked at various personal characteristics, so religious beliefs, political beliefs, various other things. They looked at gender. So we'll do a quick poll. Let's see what people think the sex difference would be. Who thinks men would be more likely to obey the authority? Who thinks women would be more likely to obey the authority? Well, the people who weren't raising their hands are actually right. There was no difference. And that's true for most of the personal characteristics. So religion, politics, these things are either no effect or very small effects. Okay. Any questions about the Milgram study? Yes?
There is a difference in the higher IQ does correlate to more obedience, right?
Really? Oh, I don't know if that's true or not.
Because it's sort of like a validation from like peers and those above you, I believe, or like other
Right, because it's a
intellects.
scientist. I hadn't heard that. That wouldn't totally surprise me, but
Yeah,
interesting.
I'm pretty sure if it's not in this experiment, then in others.
In other experiments. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I was wondering if you knew something about
No,
that.
no, I haven't heard that, but it wouldn't totally surprise me. There are some studies in which people with higher IQs show more confirmation bias. They're better kind of justifying what they already want to believe. Maybe something similar at work there, but it's interesting. Any other questions? Comments?
Did they try this across other cultures?
I think he may have tried it in Australia, which would not be that different of a culture, obviously. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure he did. But no, I don't think he's tried it in non-Western cultures. You could see that going different ways. I mean, maybe you'd predict that if a culture is more collectivistic, you might get more obedience, but I don't actually know if anyone's looked at that. Okay, next section is on different compliance techniques. So compliance is different from persuasion. Persuasion is when you are trying to get someone to change their belief. Compliance is when you are trying to get someone to change their behavior. So a lot of these techniques are used by salespeople, right? People trying to sell you stuff. The first one is the norm of reciprocity. Reciprocity is a social norm that exists in all human societies and actually in some other social animals. Like vampire bats have this. Vampire bats will share blood with each other, and if you don't share the blood back, then that's bad. The vampire bats will ostracize you. So the idea here is that if someone does something nice for you, you are expected to do something nice back. And further, if you don't, you feel kind of bad. Well, I didn't return the favor. This is why free samples are something that stores sometimes do. If a store does something nice for you, and then you don't buy anything, you feel kind of bad. There were some religious groups that the book talks about that would go around giving flowers to people, and then ask for a donation afterwards. Like they'd say, oh, the flower's free, and then ask for a donation. And this was effective because people, if they didn't give a donation after, they feel kind of bad. A little bit of a way of manipulating that, but that's an example of using the norm of reciprocity. The next two, which are sort of opposite, are door in the face and foot in the door. So this is drawing on a metaphor with a salesperson at the door, someone trying to sell you something. With door in the face, you start with something really large and absurd that people will almost certainly say no to. So I think they did one study where they would go around to doors and they would ask, hey, do you want to drive some at-risk youth to the zoo and babysit them for a day? no one says yes, right? So the idea is your door in the face, or a person slams the door in the face. If not literally, they give a clear no. And then you go down to, well, would you like to donate $20 to our organization that helps at-risk youth? And you get much higher compliance than you would if you just started with asking for $20. So you start with big, and then you go to something maybe medium. Foot in the door is the opposite. Sort of. You start small and then go medium. You start with something they will almost certainly say yes to, and then the salesperson has, the foot in the door. Right? They've gotten in. They've gotten a little bit of compliance. Now it's easier for them to get a little bit more. So let's say you're selling, chocolate or something, and you start by selling pins that are like 5 cents. You just go around like, hey, you want to buy this 5 cent pin? Yeah, sure. Okay, now do you want to buy some chocolate? And you get more compliance than you would have if you started with the chocolate. So, door in the face, large to medium. Foot in the door, small to medium. Another technique that is similar to foot in the door is lowballing. It's again, you go from smaller to bigger, just like foot in the door is, but it's for the same behavior or the same purchase. So with foot in the door, you start by selling the pins that are worth 5 cents, and then you go up to something more. With lowballing, the example the book gives is, suppose you're selling a car, and you tell them, hey, you can get this car for $800, really good deal. And then they say, yeah, sure, that sounds like a good deal. And then you go, wait, I have to talk to my manager. And you come back and say the real price, which is whatever, $1,000. And again, you're more likely to get compliance than if you had just started with saying $1,000. So the difference is, it's the same sale or the same behavior, and you just start with a low price, get compliance, and then move to the real price. Do these all make sense? Nothing too fancy? Okay. Next term, and this explains a lot of types of behavior, is de-individuation. So if you break the word down, so de-individuation, so D means to undo something. Individuation means having to do with being an individual. And the idea here is that when you're in a group, it's easy to lose your sense that you are a unique individual who is responsible for your behavior. This is one of the ways that protest can evolve into riots, right? It's easy to misbehave when you're in a big group because you sort of become a part of the group. You sort of just get carried along and don't think you're responsible for your actions. So you can get ordinary people doing really crazy things when they're kind of in this mob psychology kind of mentality. This happens a lot in Vancouver when we lose hockey games, which is always, yes. It is, you can think of it as a special case of conformity, where when you're in a big group, you lose your sense that you're an individual, although it usually has a more negative connotation. Conformity is more neutral, it could be good or bad. Usually it's used in the context of, mob psychology, riots, that kind of thing. Next, again, a pretty simple idea. Something that I'm sure you've all experienced if you've been in group projects, social loafing. When you are in a group, you tend to be lazier. You tend to work not as hard. If you don't believe you're going to be rewarded for your hard work, if it's just a group effort, people tend to work less hard. So again, if you've been in a group project, there's always at least a few people, right, who just kind of let the group carry them along. And you can test this experimentally, right? You have someone pull a rope that's linked up to something that measures how hard you're pulling, and you measure how hard they pull. Then you put them in a group of 3, and then a group of 8, and what you find is as you increase the group size, pulling strength goes down considerably. In the group of 8, for example, by over 50%. How hard people pull goes down pretty substantially once you're in a big group. Another group process, group polarization. And again, this one, strictly speaking, does not have a value judgment attached to it, just like conformity doesn't. This is just when a group already kind of agrees on something, they lean one way, and they will become more extreme in that direction. Now, it could be something good or bad. It could be a bunch of humanitarians or something getting together and becoming really humanitarian. It's often discussed in the context of politics. So if you're surrounded by people who have the same political ideology that you have, you will all tend to become more extreme. At least that's the standard case. So get a bunch of people who are center-left together, and they hang out all the time. The tendency is that they will become more extreme in that direction, or vice versa for people who are center-right. Another term that's easy to confuse with this, the difference here is subtle, is groupthink. And this one does have more of a value judgment built into it. Group polarization just means you become more extreme in one given direction, whatever the direction is. Groupthink is where bad decisions are made, when groups have certain decision-making features. And the main features are high stress to make a decision, so there's pressure to make a particular decision. The group is insulated from outside input, so they're all just talking to each other. There is a leader, kind of a strong man or a very forceful leader who leads the group to make a decision in one direction. And high cohesion. Everyone kind of wants to agree. They want to go along with the group. So in the original proposal of this concept, those are the kind of defining features of what constitutes groupthink. Two consequences of those features are self-censorship. When people are in groups that have these decision-making features, they tend to not speak their mind. Right? They tend to just say what the group wants to hear. And additionally, there is something that can result, which is called the illusion of unanimity. So unanimity, illusion obviously means like a false perception. And unanimity means everyone agrees, right? It's a unanimous decision. So you think everyone agrees, but in fact, that's just because everyone is self-censored. Right? You look around, everyone's saying the same thing that the leader is or the group wants to think. So you think, looks like everybody agrees. There are a number of historical examples of this. One is the Challenger explosion, which is what I was going to show a video of. So NASA was under a lot of pressure to get ready for this launch. It was a big media event. I believe it was the case that there was a teacher who was supposed to go, someone's nodding, into the rocket for the first time. There were various safety concerns they should have noticed. I believe that has something to do with the weather that makes it difficult for rockets to launch. I am not a rocket scientist, so I don't know the details. I'll just quickly show you what happened if you haven't seen it. So that's probably the most commonly discussed example of a groupthink. Other historical decisions have been discussed, such as the Bay of Pigs invasion, when the Americans attempted to invade Cuba with a small group of people. The assumption was that the locals would kind of rise up and overthrow Castro in conjunction with them. This invasion is called the Bay of Pigs disaster because it did not go like that. A number of other examples have been discussed, but that's the basics there. Any questions about these group processes? Yeah.
What's high cohesion?
High cohesion just means pressure for everyone to agree. So this is different from the illusion of unanimity, which is the perception that everyone agrees, even though deep down a lot of people don't agree. Other questions? Okay, on a somewhat lighter note, the book has a discussion of social interaction. And the first few terms here are ones that relate to romantic interaction. So different features that different variables that influence romantic attraction. The first one is one that you probably have never thought about very much, and that's proximity. We tend to think, oh yeah, my partner, I'm with them because they're just such a good fit for me, or whatever fantasies we tell ourselves. But one of the best predictors of who you wind up with, and in fact, both in romantic context, but also in a platonic context, if there's friends, is just how physically close are you to them, right? So they did a study of university dorms, and they asked people who your, 3 closest friends are at the university, and the best predictor was just how close was their dorm room to yours. Those are the people you see more often, and therefore those are the people you interact more with. The same is true with dating. This might be less true now with online dating, the popularity of online dating. But something else that's going on here, at least maybe more so in the old days, is the mere exposure effect. This is a very well replicated finding. The more you see something, the more you like it. That's the mere exposure effect. Right? Merely being exposed to something, on average, increases your liking of it. I believe they did a study on this once, but to make this concrete, you all, I'm sure, often sit in the same general area. The people in your immediate vicinity, by the end of this semester, will be somewhat more attractive, if I was to show you a picture of them, than the people on the other side of the room who you don't see very much. Just seeing people more, on average, makes you perceive them as more attractive. And one TV character who takes advantage of this is George Costanza. How many of you know the character George Costanza? So I know it's probably before a lot of your time. This is an excellent television program in the 90s, Seinfeld. And George, let's just say he was not blessed with good looks. So his technique for securing dates, if he by some miracle gets a first date, what he will do is accidentally leave something at the girl's place. So that he can call them and go, hey, sorry, I left my watch, can I come by and pick it up? And then she will see him again, and then he'll forget something there again, and then by the 3rd or 4th time, he says, now I'm a little bit more palatable. So watch a video of him using this technique. So I doubt the effect is quite that dramatic, but there's a memorable way to think about proximity. The next one, which kind of goes against conventional wisdom, is similarity. Well, strictly speaking, conventional wisdom is kind of divided. There's one saying that opposites attract, but there's another saying that birds of a feather flock together. So these sort of say opposite things. But in fact, the overwhelming weight of research is that you tend to wind up with people who are more similar to you in terms of their values, their preferences, even levels of attractiveness and intelligence. People tend to wind up with people who are more similar to them. Of course, as I said in 104, the big exception here is similarity in genetic relatedness. any cue that the person is related to you, including like even smell cues. I've done some really cool studies on this, where they'll have men sleep in a shirt for one night, a clean shirt. They hand it into the lab. They'll bring women into the lab and have them smell the shirts and rate how attractive the smell is. And the researchers were sneaky, and they included some shirts from the woman's relatives, I believe her brothers. And they rated those shirts as warm and reassuring, but sexually repulsive, which is good. By contrast, cues that the person has more genetic distance from you is actually rated as more attractive. So if they have immune systems, for example, that are more dissimilar, that is attractive. Other than that, similarity tends to draw you to other people. The next one, not surprising, is physical attractiveness. This is also a variable that plays a role in who you wind up being attracted to. There are both biological and cultural features of what constitutes attractiveness. So some things seem to be culturally universal, so things like symmetrical faces. This is widely thought to be a cue to genetic health and an absence of harmful mutations. And this preference actually goes all the way down to things like insects. As I said to my 104 class, insects prefer to mate with other insects that are symmetrical. That's how universal the preference is. So various things like that that are cues to genetic health and fertility are attractive in virtually all of the world's cultures. But there are other things that are susceptible to cultural influence, such as how attractive thinness is. There's quite a bit of cultural variability in things like that. One simple reason that physical attractiveness makes you more drawn to people is something called the halo effect, which I mentioned in passing on Tuesday. When you find out that someone has a good trait, you tend to assume that their other attributes are also good. So if you know that someone is athletic, you will tend to assume that they are also smart, funny, sociable, etc. And attractiveness is one of the first things that you can notice about someone. So if you look at them and think, oh, that person looks attractive, your default is to assume that their other attributes, like intelligence, humor, sociability, are also good. So that can kind of increase the extent to which attractiveness is valued, at least initially, because it leads to people assuming that their other attributes are good. One paradoxical thing about attractiveness is that more average faces are more attractive, which sounds like a contradiction, but here's what I mean. If you take a bunch of faces and average them together, you can do this with computer technology, the result is usually something more attractive than any of the individuals. So this face over here is just these three faces morphed together. And as you can see, and not just subjectively, you can give this to large samples of people tend to rate this face as more attractive. The reason probably is a more averaged face is sort of by definition less the result of deformities or mutations or other negative things impinging on development, and more healthy. See, this is true for men and women. Paul Bloom has kind of a cute line about this. He said in his intro psych class, if we were to take pictures of everyone in the class and ask who was the most attractive, the answer would be all of you. Kind of a cute little line, and this is what he means by that. Another variable is masculinization versus feminization of the face. This is, of course, different for men and women. the book says that in both cases, there is a curvilinear relationship. What that means is, so for men, for example, so these faces are obviously ordered by masculinization. It's the same face, just altered with computer technology to be more masculine or less masculine. And so if you put, masculinity as the x-axis and attractiveness as the y-axis, you find something like this, right? Where, not very masculine faces are not attractive on average, but too masculine, I guess I maybe put this the other way, but, this guy, he looks really masculine, but he kind of looks like a murderer. And you don't want to be murdered, so that's maybe too much. So something in the middle is more attractive. And something similar is true, apparently, for male attraction to women. I mentioned in 104 that there were some studies that found that what women prefer on this range varies over the course of the cycle, wherein when women are most fertile, they prefer more towards the more masculine side. And the idea was, what your biology is trying to get you to do is get the genes from the hot guy and then have a nice guy raise them. Now, this effect is very funny, but some studies don't find it. So it may or may not be real, but it's kind of funny. Okay. Any questions on the attractiveness section?
I asked about this last semester too, but have you found anything on fetishes yet?
No. Oh, that's right, you did ask that. No, I still have nothing that I'm going to say in this class about that. Okay, moving swiftly along. I like having a job, So, the next thing is social exchange theory. This applies actually both to romantic relationships and to ordinary friendships. Very simple idea. It's a kind of economic way of thinking about human relationships, wherein you tend to be friends or stay friends with someone if they offer you more benefits than costs. All human beings have some degree of sucking, not being pleasant people. There's always some cost involved. And according to social exchange theory, we stay friends with people when the rewards exceed the cost. So a very kind of cold economic way of modeling how friendships work. The next section is about various sex different. Oh, yes.
So, okay, if you tend to stay friends longer with someone that, you feel is more rewarding than costing to you, aren't you technically more costing to them if they're more rewarding to you?
Only if all rewards are zero sum. So this is an idea in economics. There's some times when a reward is, like if I give you $20, I lost $20. If we both go to the movies and have a good time, it's not like I'm losing something and you're gaining something. We're both benefiting from it.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be the way to think about that. The next section is on sex differences in romantic and sexual preferences. Some of this is review from Psych 104. Although unlike Psych 104, in this section it talks about both evolutionary explanations and sociological explanations. So some of the differences the book mentions, in very large samples, actually some of this work was done by David Buss, who I think he had over 10,000 subjects. He looked at dozens of different cultures and just asked men and women, what do you look for in a long-term partner? And kind of rate what's most important to you. As I said in 104, they agree on the top three. The top three for men and women were kindness, intelligence, and exciting personality across cultures. As I said in 104, this is self-report, so you maybe have to take that with a grain of salt, but at least in terms of self-report, that's what you find. But when you move down the list, men care more about youth and physical attractiveness than women do, and women care more about earning potential than men do. And again, this is a cross-cultural difference. Additionally, cross-culturally, men tend to prefer women who are younger than them. I think by 2 years is the average preference. And women tend to prefer men who are about 2 years older than them. Probably the largest difference is preference for casual sex. So if you're in my 104 class, you'll remember that I think this is the funniest study in the history of psychology. Does anyone remember this? The greatest study ever? So what they did was they sent out a group of attractive men and attractive women into a university, and they were instructed to approach random people and say the following thing. Hello, my name is so-and-so. I find you very attractive. Would you like to? And then they would ask one of three things. They would ask, would you like to go to dinner? Would you like to go back to my apartment? Or would you like to go to bed with me? And they would ask different things to different people. They wouldn't ask like all three to the same person. And then they just did some statistics, did some math, and looked at what the reactions were. So when women were approached by attractive men asking these three questions, that's really bad for me. 50% said yes to dinner. That's pretty good batting average. Less than 10% said yes to this, and literally 0 people said yes to this. But for men, the numbers worked out like this. With the same number saying yes to dinner, and 75% saying yes, they would go to bed with them. So that's pretty sad. And again, this is a difference. There's different ways of measuring this. You can also use self-report. And when you use various scales, you find that this difference also exists cross-culturally. So the question is, what causes these differences? So in 104, we talked about various evolutionary hypotheses that relate to this. And just to simplify, I mean, I don't have time to go into the same level of detail. Women have a larger degree of minimum parental investment. That's basically the evolutionary explanation. In order for a woman to pass on her genes, she has to spend at least 2 years, give or take, with the kid. Just to be pregnant for 9 months, breastfeed for a period of time after that, and during that time she can't really have another kid. And therefore there's evolutionary selection pressure over time for her to be more choosy, especially for casual sexual encounters. If the guy's not sticking around to help out, it better be some good genes. They want more time to evaluate. Whereas for a man, over evolutionary time, there is selection pressure to be less choosy, particularly for casual sexual encounters. The sociological explanation has to do with the fact that all cultures around the world have some degree of patriarchy, of male dominance. And indeed, they did a really nice study. They looked at 53 countries, over 200,000 people, and gave them various scales that measure things like sex drive and preference for casual sex. And you do find a correlation wherein cultures with more gender equality tend to have smaller differences in things like preference for casual sex. So the most gender equal country in the world by many different measures is Iceland, apparently. And it also has the smallest degree of difference in measures like this. Still not 0 though. There is no country in the world where this difference works out to 0 or where it's reversed. So probably a bit of both going on. There probably is some evolutionary basis to the difference, but culture can shape and modify it. And the reverse is true too. The countries with the biggest differences in preference for casual sex and other sex differences in this area were the countries with the greatest degree of gender inequality. Any questions about that? Now, despite the fact that this particular difference proves to be fairly large, in general, the book says sex differences tend to be small. There's a nice quote from Steven Pinker. There's an old book called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, and Pinker has a nice quote which is, men are not from Mars and women are not from Venus. Men and women are both from Africa, where we evolved together as a single species. We are more similar than different, although there are these cases where there are some differences. Okay, for the next section, I'm going to tell you to ignore something in the book, which is Sternberg's model of love. I think this model had a nice insight, which is that there are different components to romantic love, and that different relationships can have different combinations of these three. I think that's a good insight, but there is a more recent, and I think more empirically well-supported model that has that same feature. It has three different components that can combine in different ways, but unlike Sternberg's model, this model is more well integrated with neuroscience and endocrinology. It actually has specific brain systems and hormone systems associated with each of the three systems. This is from Helen Fisher, who I will be showing a video of. Helen Fisher is a biological anthropologist. And the three components are sexual lust or the sex drive, romantic attraction, and bonding. Three different systems, and the idea here is each of them, for any particular relationship, can have different combinations, right? You can have an old kind of stale couple that's been together for a long time. They may have the bonding, but not so much of these two anymore. There can be someone who you're just sexually attracted to, but you could not imagine being in a relationship with them. That would be just this one. I guess I should say what each one is. So she defines this one as just pure sexual attraction with nothing else, at least with this one. And this is associated with testosterone and estrogen. Romantic attraction is that obsessive interest within one person, right? Having a crush on someone, being obsessed with someone, really wanting to date them, or in the early stages of dating, kind of the honeymoon phase, when you're like madly in love with them, can't stop thinking about them, and that sort of thing. And this seems to be associated with the dopamine system, which is the same chemical that's released in reward in general. So eating tasty food, taking addictive drugs, that kind of rush feeling, that's what dopamine is involved in. And this is associated with the oxytocin system. This is when you've been with someone for a longer period of time, and you start to feel more bonded to them. So I'll show a video of Helen Fisher saying a bit about these three systems, and then we'll keep going. Okay, we'll stop there. So there's lots of videos of her on YouTube. She's a very serious researcher. We'll stick with her model. So in that video, she doesn't mention estrogen. In other videos and work of hers, she has. And she calls these somewhat different things in different videos, but the idea behind each should be clear. The next idea is again a review from something in 104, although we didn't use this term for it, and that's the cognitive arousal model. This is similar to the two-factor theory of emotions that you would have learned about in 104, where emotions are produced both by physiological arousal, so fast heart rate, things like that, and how you interpret that arousal. So to pick an example other than love, if I'm walking home and I hear footsteps behind me, my heart rate's going to go up. If I turn around and it's a friend, I'll think, oh, I'm excited to see my friend, or pleasantly surprised to see my friend. If I turn around and it's a wolf, I'm going to interpret the heart rate as fear. And the idea here is the same can be true for love or attraction. And this leads to something called transfer of excitation. So the idea is excitation or arousal can be caused by one thing. But if you interpret it in the right way, or rather if you're led to interpret it in the right way, you can interpret it as being due to something else. So the classic study, which we would have looked at in 104, you have two bridges, one that's very high, like a suspension bridge, and one that's very low and stable. Guys walk across these bridges, and you have an attractive woman at the other end, who, through a series of events, winds up giving the guy her number. The men are more likely to call her if they were walking across the high bridge. And the interpretation is their heart rate's already going up. But then when they see the woman, they interpret the fast heart rate as meaning I'm attracted to this woman. So in other words, the excitation or the arousal is being misinterpreted as being due to something else. The book has a section on someone named John Gottman. This is not testable. It's a little like an application section. John Gottman is someone who did very serious work on married couples, and through a lot of study, he was able to develop a model that allowed him to predict who would get divorced and who wouldn't, I believe with 85% accuracy. So he was very good at predicting which relationships would work out and which ones wouldn't. One of the biggest variables that predicts which ones work out is not anger or fighting, but contempt. Kind of like rolling your eyes, like I can't stand this person. I don't take anything they say seriously. That was a much better predictor than fighting. Fighting was not a very important variable. Okay, I will close us off with a little pop psych quiz you can use with your friends. This is more for fun. This is not a validated test. More of a party trick than anything else. I want you all to imagine that you are stranded in the wilderness with only 5 animals. And the 5 animals are a lion, a sheep, a horse, a cow, and now I forgot, and a monkey. Now, write down which of these would you give up first. So you have to give up one of them. And write the number 1 beside that. Then you have to, yes? I'm going to say assume that all of these will obey you. I think you can at least take that for granted. And then order them from 1 to 5. 1 being the one you will get rid of first, and 5 being the one you will keep until the end. Oh, yeah.
Get rid of as in kill or just
Kill.
Okay.
Yes. And you are able to kill.
Is it a tropical island or
A what?
a tropical island or
It's a desert. There's nothing there except these animals. Okay. I'll go ahead and give the interpretation of this. So, you don't have to raise your hand, but if you want to, it can be kind of fun. Who thinks they would give up the lion first? Show of hands. This means the first thing you will give up, if you're in a difficult life situation, is your pride. That goes first. Who says sheep? This means, and you probably shouldn't have raised your hand for this one, the first thing you will give up is your romantic partner. So, I mean, again, don't take this too seriously. Okay, who thinks they will give up the horse? This means the last thing you will give up is your independence.
Last.
Cow, who gives up the cow first? This means the first thing you will give up is your possessions. And how about monkey? Who says they give up the monkey first? This means the first thing you will give up if you're in a difficult situation is your children. So, all right. On that note, have a good day.